Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere dry, ancient, and strangely rhythmic. The streets of Babylon. The sun is already warming the baked clay walls, and there's a smell of sesame oil in the air. You step into sandals that weren't made for comfort, brushing past woven stalls of dyed wool and piles of dried dates that look like wrinkly fingers. All around the city murmurs a blend of goats bleating, merchants yelling about barley prices, and distant drums echoing from the temple above. But the real rhythm here isn't music. It's time. And you, poor soul, are about to try to live without a wristwatch, phone, or even a ticking clock. You'll be lucky to know when breakfast ends or prayer begins. Because here in Babylon, time doesn't shout, it drips. Now. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Drop it in the comments below. Now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the day as a dusty breeze pushes dried reeds against the temple wall. The city is already alive, yet there's something oddly unhurried about it all. No church bells, no town criers shouting the hour. No one wears a timepiece strapped to their robe, obviously. In fact, no one seems particularly pressed for punctuality. Still, somehow, things happen on time: meals, prayers, court hearings, moon rituals, barley shipments, all unfold like notes in an invisible song. You pass a man stirring ink in a bowl made from a goat's horn, probably a scribe preparing to log tax records. A woman at a stall offers you pomegranate syrup in a ceramic cup that looks like it's seen better centuries. You decline, mostly because it smells like vinegar, and continue toward the temple district, where everything pulses more slowly. Even though it's early, there's a queue near the temple's edge. Locals in coarse linen tunics line up to present offerings. Loaves of barley bread, bundles of myrrh, little statuettes of gods with fixed smiles. All of it part of their quiet. Bargain with time. Do this now, so that tomorrow may come. You spot a child counting something on the ground, small pebbles lined up in groups of 12. She's not playing, she's learning. 12 is sacred here. 12 months, 12 zodiac signs, 12 major gods. It's no accident that the Babylonians divided the day into units of 12. You crouch and watch her rearrange the stones. And it clicks. She's practicing her hours like you did with multiplication tables. Further in. The scent of burnt incense thickens, curling under your nose like lazy steam. You pass a row of scholars seated beneath reed mats for shade. They're hunched over clay tablets, styluses clicking with slow precision. These are the calendar keepers and time scribes, priests trained to see the flow of time, not just in the sky, but in clay. A priest in copper jewelry motions for you to follow. You obey because this is Babylon, and when someone in shiny metal waves you in, you go. He leads you past a sunlit courtyard where acolytes are sweeping sand in methodical spirals. They're not just cleaning, they're preparing the sacred space for the temple's afternoon alignment with the sun, an event that happens so precisely they can predict it to the moment. Without watches, just water and shadow, you're brought to a dim chamber lit by an oil lamp and open skylight. In the middle sits something you don't expect, a deep ceramic bowl with thin spouts around the rim. Water drips into it steadily from a clay vessel suspended above. The drops are almost hypnotic. Each one sends ripples across the surface, and there are tiny carved lines inside the bowl measuring, not liquid, but moments. This is a clepsydra, a water clock, and tonight you'll come to know it better than your own hand, but not yet. First you're handed a long piece of dried fig, which you chew slowly while the priest explains, mostly in gestures, that this bowl can tell time, not by ticking, but by filling. Each level on the bowl matches a portion of the day. When the water reaches line 3, it's time for the noon bell. Line 6, it's time to call in the goats. Line 9, definitely bedtime. You're skeptical. Water can spill, evaporate, freeze, and it makes you need to pee. But apparently it also holds time if you treat it right. Later that evening you return to your little mud brick room near the city's edge. You pass more locals discussing omens and grain weights. You overhear someone say the phrase Hour of Ishtar and realize even their language folds time around deities and stars. It's like they're never really watching a clock. They're feeling it dot as you lay down to sleep. The city hums around you. You close your eyes and hear a drip. You don't know if it's a leaky pipe or a sacred bowl. Either way, it's counting something. And in Babylon, that's enough. Asterisk, asterisk. You wake to soft light spilling through the woven reed mat above you, a golden haze that feels less like dawn and more like a polite suggestion from the sun. Time to rise. If you feel like it, you sit up, stretching your back against the uneven mud brick wall and glance around. There's no bell, no alarm. Just the distant clip of sandals and the occasional grunt of a donkey being persuaded to move. Time, here, doesn't declare itself. It seeps in the same way the morning does, gradually, almost sneakily. And you, having somehow slept through Babylon's unmeasured night, step out into a world that still hasn't invented what you'd call a proper clock. You wander through the neighborhood as the day warms. A baker waves at you with a palm dusted in flour. You smell coriander, ash, and roasted chickpeas. Every turn of the street has its own scent, its own mood. Some shops are already open, others still shuttered with palm-thatched curtains. Everyone seems to know when to do what, but no one can tell you the exact time dot. So how do they do it? Before the clepsydra, before even the idea of a numbered hour, the Babylonians, like most early civilizations, told time by nature. You pause at a street corner where a boy is watching the shadow of a tall pole move across a drawn circle in the dirt. No fancy sundial, just shadow play. This, it turns out, is how many measured the day, not by how long something lasted, but by where the light landed. It's harder than it sounds. On cloudy days, shadows disappear. In winter, the sun barely makes a decent arc. But for thousands of years, humans used the sun and stars like wristwatches. The Babylonians were among the First, to systematize it, they divided the day and night into 12 parts, each partly because of their base 60 number system, partly because 12 just felt right. 12 zodiac signs, 12 lunar months. The math was poetic. You stopped to watch an older man with a carved staff gently move his toe across the dirt, adjusting a stone marker. He glances at the sun, nods to himself, and walks away. You've just seen a time adjustment ancient style. At night, the stars take over. And in Babylon, you'll soon learn the sky is more than decoration, it's a full-blown calendar. Constellations aren't just patterns. They're clocks. The priests of the temple, those quiet astrologers hunched over clay tablets, can tell you what time of year it is by whether Taurus or Scorpio is rising. They can also tell you when to plant barley, when to worship Ishtar, and more ominously, when a royal eclipse might signal trouble. Historians still argue whether the Babylonians fully understood the movements of planets as predictable or simply divine whimsy. Either way, their guesses were uncannily accurate. Venus had an 8-year cycle. They knew. Jupiter's path across the sky, mapped in wet clay, but you're just trying to figure out when lunch is. Find yourself relying on more basic cues. The angle of the sun on the wall, the sound of goats being herded, the aroma of lentils cooking 2 streets over. You realize something quietly wonderful. Time is everywhere. If you learn how to look for it, you wander past the edge of the city where fields begin. Slaves and laborers are already working the canals, pulling up irrigation gates carved with crude lion faces. A foreman claps his hands 3 times some agreed-upon signal, perhaps the equivalent of first hours over. The men nod and switch tasks. You hear a woman call to her children from a roof, her voice echoing like a daily bell. Maybe it is a bell, just not made of metal. In Babylon, sound tells time. 2 around noon. Well, what feels like noon, you find yourself back in the courtyard outside the temple. The air shimmers with heat, and the clay walls radiate warmth like ancient toasters. A priest in white linen appears and gently points you toward the clepsydra chamber. Again, there the bowl has changed. A different vessel now drips into the measuring basin. You notice the spout is thinner, the angle slightly altered. You ask why? The priest doesn't answer. Instead, he hands you a flat tablet covered in tiny wedge-shaped marks, cuneiform. You can't read it, but you pretend to study it, nodding solemnly. Later, a helpful acolyte whispers that this tablet records hour proportions for the season. In winter, the daylight hours are shorter, so the clepsydra's spout must release water more slowly to match the shifting sun. It's clever, also maddening. Time, it seems, isn't fixed here. It stretches and contracts depending on the calendar. You sit cross-legged beside the bowl and count drops. They fall like seconds. Not your seconds, but Babylon's seconds. Each one smooth, soft, and almost mournfully precise. You lose track after 20. It's soothing, like rain in a cave. And then you laugh quietly so the priest doesn't scowl. Because you realize, in this world everyone is living by invisible drips and distant stars. And no one seems to mind. By the time you head back toward your room, The streets have thinned. People are resting. Shops are shut. Somewhere a man plucks a lyre with lazy fingers. You pass a woman grinding spices who offers you a fig. You take it, grateful. The sky begins to blush. No one tells you it's evening, but you know. The goats return. The shadows stretch. A slow wind picks up from the river dot, and you, time traveler, now understand. Before clocks, time was a feeling, a shadow, a sound, a dripping bowl, and somehow that's enough. The next morning begins not with a sound, but a change in color. The sky shifts from ink to charcoal to a sleepy sort of pink. You stretch on your mat, then rise slowly, joints popping like twigs. There's no rush. After all, you're in Babylon, where time is a trickle, not a tick. Today you've been invited to the ziggurat. Not just any part of it, you're heading into the sacred upper levels, where time itself is kept under lock and clay. You're not quite sure how you ended up with this honor, but you suspect it has something to do with your persistent, vaguely confused staring at the clepsydra yesterday. The ziggurat looms above the city like a tiered layer cake left out too long in the sun faded. Dusty, but still impressive. You climb slowly, stone by stone, each one carved with marks and weathered by centuries of sandals. At each level, you see signs of ritual. Urns of ash, bundles of dried reeds, chalky smudges in the shape of hands. Eventually, you reach a small, square room near the top. It's shaded by linen panels and surrounded by thick walls that muffle the city below. The air smells faintly of cedarwood and something sour-aged water, perhaps. At the center of the chamber is a new clepsydra, this, one more elaborate than the last. Its basin is a rich blue glazed ceramic, marked with concentric rings. A stream of water trickles from a narrow spout set high into the wall. You're not alone. Several attendants move quietly around the space. One gently taps the side of the basin with a reed stylus. Another adjusts the angle of the spout, watching. The stream like a midwife observing a birth. You sit cross-legged against the wall, trying not to sneeze. This clepsydra isn't just for daily chores. This one keeps temple time, sacred time. Rituals must begin precisely when certain stars rise, or when the last drop falls to a certain ring. Time in this room is holy. A priest steps forward tall, with a long, dark beard and a robe that makes a soft brushing sound when he moves. He gestures toward the basin and begins to speak in slow Akkadian, which you mostly understand thanks to the universal language of vague hand signals. He explains that this clepsydra isn't calibrated to the day. It's aligned with the moon's position over the temple roof. When the moon passes a particular carved window, the spout is opened. The water begins its descent. The ritual begins. You glance out the window. The moon is faint in the sky, barely a ghost. But apparently, that's enough. The clepsydra starts dripping. Historians still argue whether these early temple clocks were precise instruments or glorified water features with celestial flair. But watching it now, you're convinced. These people cared deeply about time. Not just knowing it, but honoring it. Measuring it was a sacred act, not just a convenience. You shift positions and lean in closer. The water drops with a gentle, rhythmic plunk, echoing slightly in the bowl. Each drop lands in the center, sending ripples that reach out to the ceramic markings. It's a slow process. One drop every few seconds. No rush, no alarms. Just water and patience. The priest hands you a stylus and a clay tablet. You blink in surprise, then awkwardly try to copy one of the symbols from his example. Your version looks like a goat trying to dance. He nods politely. You realize this tablet is a time log. The water level is noted alongside moon position, wind, conditions, even incense selection. Timekeeping here is more than just numbers. It's contextual. If a ritual begins during a windstorm, that fact is recorded. If the moon is shy or the water unusually slow, it's noted. They don't just measure time, they describe it. As the ritual begins, a hush settles over the room. A low chant rises from below, carried on the breeze. The water continues to drip. You lose yourself in its soothing, steady, inevitable. Like a lullaby made of gravity. Eventually, a gong sounds. Not a loud one, just a soft chime made by striking bronze with bone. The priest nods. The water is stopped. The ritual is done. You follow the attendants as they gently clean the basin, using soft cloths and drying herbs. The process is tender, almost loving. This isn't a tool, it's a partner. You start to see why they give the clepsydra so much attention. It's the heartbeat of their world. Before leaving, you glance at the inscriptions around the rim of the bowl. They're not just numbers, they're prayers. One reads, "May time flow without bitterness." Another says, "May the stars bless each drop." You descend the ziggurat slowly, sunlight bouncing off the whitewashed walls. Below, the city buzzes with its usual sleepy urgency. Merchants shout, camels grumble, sandals shuffle. But up here, it's different. Time doesn't press, it persuades. By the time you reach the base, you feel like you've been underwater. Everything is too loud, too fast, too modern. You miss the dripping. You turn back for one last look at the temple. The clepsydra still sits in its chamber, doing what it's always done. No fame, no ticking, no shiny gears. Just drop after drop, reminding the world to slow down. And for the first time, you don't want to check your watch. You just listen. The next day starts in your bones. Not from exertion, Babylon doesn't rush, but from the subtle ache of having sat beside a water clock for hours, absorbing the slow pulse of time. Today you're not climbing any temples. Today you're wandering. Watching. You find yourself in a small side alley, lined with shops built into sun-baked clay walls. There's a place selling linen, another with chipped jars stacked like sleeping turtles. But what catches your eye isn't the pottery, it's the silence between drops. At the rear of a stall shaded with faded sailcloth, a man with a sunburned nose is fiddling with a basin. It's shallower than the temple clepsydra, but still has those same careful incisions, lines like rings in a tree, each telling a story of passing time. You crouch nearby and watch as he pours water from a goatskin pouch into a hanging bowl with a pin-sized hole at its base. He glances at you and grunts. You take that as an invitation. He explains in gruff, Sumerian-tinged Akkadian, some words muddled. some drawn out for effect, that his clock isn't for ritual. It's for business, specifically timing disputes between merchants. You blank. A clepsydra for arguing? Turns out when two merchants have a squabble over whose olive oil is thicker or who arrived first at the barley pile, someone has to decide fairly. Enter the water clock. Each side gets to speak for the length it takes the bowl to fill to a specific line, like a divine hourglass. No interruptions, no yelling. Just talk, drip, and done. You watch him demonstrate. He fills the bowl, then begins. A mock argument in two voices, gruff and higher pitched, like a sheep arguing with a goat. The whole thing is ridiculous and delightful. You stifle a laugh. The bowl fills. Time's up. He nods solemnly. Whoever speaks first, he says, usually, loses. This quirky civic use of timekeeping is something you hadn't considered. It's not just for the gods or astrologers. The clepsydra trickles its way into law, trade, even petty grievances. It becomes the neutral referee, watery, unbothered, and incapable of favoritism. Historians still argue whether these merchant clocks were standardized or wildly inconsistent. Some say local elders made up timing systems on the fly. Others insist merchants travel with their own preferred clocks, like lawyers carrying pocket rule books. Either way, the clock isn't sacred anymore. It's streetwise. You wander deeper into the city and spot another use entirely. A group of children gathered around a wide, flat basin. One of them, barefoot and wild-haired, drops pebbles into the water, counting aloud between drops. A game? Possibly. But an older boy explains, with the smugness of someone who just learned something cool, that this is how they train their drop sense. Drop sense, apparently, is the ability to guess how long something takes based on the number of drips. Need to know how long until the bread is done? About 50 drops. How long does it take a fig to roast? Maybe 30. How long until your mom gets back from the well? Depends on the sandals. You smile. It's absurd and it makes total sense. Without watches, your brain starts to listen to other rhythms. Drops, heartbeats, footsteps. Time becomes something felt, not seen. Later, you stop by a bathhouse. It's not like Roman bathhouses with columns and mosaics. This one is simple mud. Walls, reed mats, steam rising from stone basins. Still, there's a small clepsydra tucked in the corner. You notice it's used by the bath attendants to signal when someone's session is up. Drip by drip, a bather's time slides away into the past, and they respect it. When the final mark is reached, the attendant gives a quiet cough and a nod. The bather stands, wraps in linen, and leaves without fuss. It's surprisingly polite. The water clock doesn't demand. It gently reminds. You begin to see water. Clocks everywhere. In kitchens to time stew. In weaving rooms to track thread soakings. In courts to time confessions. Not because they're perfectly accurate, but because they're fair, transparent. Anyone can watch the waterfall. No tricks, just gravity. You pause near a small public square as a storyteller sets up under a date palm. He places a clay bowl with a slow leak in front of him. One story per bowl. When the water's gone, he stops mid-sentence if necessary. It's the rule. The crowd settles. The story begins. You listen as he weaves a tale of a fox who outsmarts a lion by trading hours for honey. The details are fuzzy, but you love it anyway. Eventually, the bull nears its final ring. The storyteller slows, stretches out his words. The crowd leans in. One more drop, one more pause, then silence. He bows. No ending, just time fulfilled. That night you sit on the roof of your little room, knees hugged to your chest, watching stars pop one by one into the sky. The city below still murmurs distant. Lyres, feet on dust, the occasional bray of a stubborn donkey. But mostly it's still. You hear water somewhere, a slow drip. You can't tell if it's a clepsydra or just a cracked pipe. Either way, it makes you smile. Time in Babylon doesn't chase you. It flows, it waits, and it always arrives. You lie back and let the sky tilt over you. Somewhere, a child counts pebbles, a priest checks a bowl, a storyteller pauses, and you, adrift in an old world, finally stop trying to measure time and just listen. You rise before the sun, stirred not by a clock but by the deep silence that comes just before the world remembers it's awake. The stars above Babylon still twinkle faintly, though the eastern sky has begun to fade from midnight to slate. The air is cool, almost chilly, and your breath rises in little wisps as you descend from the rooftop, sandals slapping softly against clay stairs. Today, you're set to study a clock with no hands. A clepsydra, yes, but one unlike the others you've seen. This one belongs to a scholar, not a priest or merchant. He's said to live just beyond the eastern gate, tucked into a crooked house that leans like it's been listening in on every story the wind has ever told. You find him crouched in his courtyard, hunched over a large shallow basin with strange angles and ridges etched into its floor. He doesn't look up. His beard is uncombed, and his robe has a large ink stain near the hem. But when he finally speaks, his voice is calm, like someone who has spent more time with trickling water than shouting people. He invites you to sit. You do, legs crossed, eyes squinting in the morning light as he begins to pour water slowly from a tall, narrow-necked vessel into the basin. You watch the level rise and spread, eventually touching the first of many uneven ridges carved into the inner wall. This, he says, is time without hands, without gears. Only silence, gravity, and patience. The design is clever. Each ridge, each line, represents not equal units, but proportional ones. Because here's the problem. A simple bowl fills faster at the beginning than at the end. The pressure changes. Flow slows. If you want true measurement, you need shapes that lie dot, and so. The scholar's bowl curves and bulges in ways that look accidental, but aren't. Each swelling in the basin slows the water just enough to simulate a more constant flow. It's a clock that compensates for its own flaws by anticipating them. Historians still argue whether these basin designs were passed down through oral tradition, trial and error, or divine inspiration. Some say clay workers had secret guilds for shaping clepsydras, whispering formulas for angles and curves. Others think they just guessed. The scholar gestures to a pile of failed bowls in the corner. Each one is slightly off, too fast, too slow, too unpredictable. He shrugs. Time, he says, is hard to hold. You nod, but he isn't finished. He hands you a small wax tablet and a stylus. Track the rise, he says. Write what you feel. You frown, feel, not measure. But as the water climbs, kissing the second ridge, you begin to sense what he means. There's a rhythm here, yes, but also a mood. Some drips are hurried, others hesitant. The breeze cools the surface and slows evaporation. A pigeon lands nearby, shaking the bowl. Time wobbles. Time laughs. You scribble. Asterisk, asterisk, line 2. Impatient. Line 3. Unsure. Line 4. Nearly poetic. Asterisk, asterisk, he chuckles when he reads your notes. Close enough, he says, Dot. You spend the rest of the morning watching the bowl fill. It's not thrilling, but it is oddly comforting. Each level reached feels like a small promise kept. Nothing rushed, nothing skipped. The scholar doesn't. Check the time he listens to it. You begin to understand why some Babylonians use these bowls in meditation, focusing on the drip as others might focus on breath. The bowl reaches its final ridge just before noon, and the scholar tips the remaining. Water onto a thirsty pomegranate tree. A good clock, he says, should also be a good friend to the garden. You leave with clay dust on your fingers and a head full of strange thoughts. A clock that lies in order to tell the truth. A clock that feels emotion. A clock that waters trees. On your way back into the city, you pass an area where artisans shape bricks. A group of boys is molding clay into simple bowls. One turns to show you as it's lopsided, cheerful, and completely unusable. It's for my goat, he says. You laugh, but beside him an older boy is working with more care. He smooths the rim, carves delicate lines inside. It's for my sister, he says quietly. She's sick. We're going to keep time for her, so we know when to give her the herbs. You pause, Dot, in this moment. Time becomes something else entirely, not a schedule, not a ritual, not a game, but a lifeline. Even here, in an age without electricity or watches or data plans, people use time to care for each other. You walk back into the heart of the city, thinking about all the ways people hold time, in clay, in stars and drips and prayer. The scholar's voice lingers in your ear. Time is hard to hold, and yet they do, drop by drop. You wake the next morning to the soft clanking of ceramic and the distant bleat of a goat expressing its opinion of the sunrise. Today it's hotter, thicker, like the air has been soaking in clay for too long. Your linen tunic sticks to your back as you make your way toward the central square, where a priest has promised to explain why Babylon, of all the places on earth, chose water as its timekeeper. You arrive at a shaded corner of the square, where the priest is already seated, cross-legged beside a clepsydra. This one is plain unpainted, with only a few shallow lines around its interior. The water inside is still. The priest motions for you to sit, then leans in, whispering like he's about to share a recipe or a piece of gossip. Why water? He asks, then taps the bowl. Because it never forgets to fall. You raise an eyebrow. That's poetic, sure, but not exactly scientific. He explains that in Babylon, water was more than a necessity. It was sacred. Life came from the rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, twin veins feeding the land. Their floods dictated planting, harvesting, worship. Their levels were watched more closely than a politician's promises. And so, naturally, time itself began to imitate the most trusted thing in their world. Water dot, the priest picks up a small reed and traces a line in the dust. The sun is glorious, he says, but unreliable. Clouds can hide it. Mountains distort it. Shadows stretch and lie. But water behaves. Mostly, you think back to the scholar's oddly shaped bowl, the one that lied with its curves to tell the truth. You're beginning to realize that behaves is relative. Water drips, sure, but not always consistently. And in a world of open air, sun-baked pots, and thirsty goats, there's room for variation. Historians still argue whether Babylonian clepsydras were truly reliable or more symbolic. Some say their use was primarily ceremonial, others believe they served practical daily purposes, timing everything from legal testimonies to barley soaking. The truth is likely somewhere between sacred and soggy. The priest continues, now warming to the subject. He tells you that in early Babylon, time was a kind of magic. The gods moved the stars moved the seasons, and the seasons whispered to the rivers. All of it was connected. Measuring time, then, wasn't just about keeping things on schedule, it was about syncing yourself with the universe. You glance at the clepsydra. A drop falls. Then another. You ask about mistakes. What if someone forgets to refill the bowl? What if it's too hot and the water evaporates too quickly? What if he interrupts you with a wave? Then time is forgiven, he says simply. You blink. Forgiven? If the bowl dries too fast, we say the gods were in a hurry. If it's slow, they wanted us to rest. Either way, the world turns. You let that sit dot as the heat grows stronger. You follow the priest through the square, past fishmongers swatting flies with braided palm fans, and potters fanning kilns with scraps of old linen. He leads you toward a small garden tucked behind the temple's outer wall. It's quiet here, just the buzz of insects and the soft trickle of an irrigation channel. He points to the water. Same flow, he says. Different purpose. You kneel beside it. The channel forks into 3 smaller ditches, each leading to a different plant bed. The water is constant, but split. You watch it move, curving and whispering through reeds. It occurs to you the clepsydra is just a small version of this human-sized attempt to harness nature's rhythm. Then he gestures to a spot in the garden where a shallow, bell-shaped basin sits under a fig tree. It's old, chipped, half-covered. In moss. He tells you it's one of the first clepsydras used in this district. Not for rituals, not for law. For naps, he says with a grin dot apparently, workers in the orchard used it to measure rest breaks. They'd fill the bowl to a certain line, lie in the shade, and doze until it emptied. No one argued. No one cheated. When the last drop fell, they returned to work. There was trust in the drip. You laugh, imagining modern offices trying that system. Later, you're handed a worn clay tablet. Its surface rough, inscriptions faded. The priest explains that it's one of the oldest known water clock records in Babylon, not a timetable. A poem. The lines praise a bowl that bleeds time slowly, like honey from the sky. The last line reads, "Blessed are those who wait." Without question, you sit under the fig tree for a while, watching the leaves shiver in the breeze. You understand now. Babylon didn't choose water for precision. It chose it for peace, for humility, for the reminder that no matter how clever your carvings or careful your math, time is ultimately something you feel, not control. You rise slowly, a little dustier, a little more thoughtful. Back in the city's noise, the priest's words follow. You. Water never forgets to fall, and neither, you suspect, will you. Night has fallen again in Babylon, though the sky is not fully dark. It glows softly moonlight, mingling with faint temple torches, the flicker of oil lamps in windows, and distant stars that hang so low they seem like sleepy gods watching from above. You step carefully along a worn pathway, sandals brushing dust from ancient stones. Tonight, you've been given a new role, temple guardian. Specifically, you're to assist in watching the water clock overnight. Because yes, even in the stillness of sleep, Babylon keeps time. You're led to a quiet chamber near the ziggurat's northern face. It's cool, dim, and smells faintly of wet clay and cedar smoke. The priest who welcomes you speaks softly, as if the walls are napping and mustn't be disturbed. He gestures to a large clepsydra set into a stone base deep, with high walls and thick, heavy rings carved inside. "This one is special," he murmurs. "It keeps the hours no one sees." You peer closer. A narrow channel from a jug overhead allows water to drip into the basin with careful restraint. A small carved float made of wood and beeswax rises slowly with the water, its tip pointing to the hour marks along the rim. No loud gears, no levers. Just rise and float. Tonight, the float is your job. You sit cross-legged near the basin, stylus in hand, clay tablet beside you. Your task: every time the float reaches a new ring, you mark it. One symbol for each hour. You'll work in shifts with two others, trading off quietly, without fanfare. No shouting across courtyards, just a whisper. Just a nod as the first hour passes. You listen to the drops. They echo ever so faintly in the chamber, like a child tapping on a drum with a single finger. You start to sense their rhythm steadier, then breathing softer than thought. You mark the first line on the tablet. It's strange, being responsible for time. You're used to following it, rushing for appointments, missing it, stretching it, resenting it. But now it depends on you, or more precisely, on your attention. The priest hands you a small oil lamp and leaves. The flame flickers gently, casting shadows that sway across the walls like ancient dancers. You're alone with the water and with the dark second hour. A new ring reached. Another symbol scratched into the clay. There's a strange calm to it, like the city has exhaled. You imagine what else is happening beyond the walls. Lovers whispering, dogs purling into warm corners, drunks singing to fig trees, and through It all this slow, unbothered drip dot. You shift your legs and stretch your back. Not much changes in here. But out there the world turns dot third hour. This time, as the float reaches its mark, you notice something off. A tiny tremble in the float. The drop rhythm falters for a few seconds, then resumes. You check the jug above. A tiny bubble had formed at the spout. Nothing dangerous. Just a reminder that even gravity gets hiccups. Historians still argue whether night clepsydras were truly precise or whether guardians like you simply fudged the hours when the water misbehaved. After all, who's going to check your work at 3 in the morning? But in Babylon, they didn't fudge. They trusted the watchers, not because they were perfect, but because they were present. Fourth hour. Your hand is tired. Your neck aches. But your mind is strangely awake. You begin to imagine stories about the float. Maybe it's a boat ferrying tiny gods across a sea of dreams. Maybe it's a sunbeam trapped in the dark, rising to greet the moon. Maybe it's just a stick with a wax tip and you're very, very sleep deprived. Still, you're right, fifth hour. You start to hear more than just water. You hear the temple breathing, the soft hiss of wind against the stone, the occasional creak of a door, the low groan of the basin as it accepts another slow tide, and something else, the footsteps of your replacement. He enters without speaking, kneels beside you, and gives a small bow. You return the gesture. He lights his own lamp. You show him your markings. He nods. It's enough. You rise and stretch, bones quietly protesting. The water continues to fall, and your watch is over. As you leave the chamber, the stars greet you. Again, faint clouds drift across the moon. Somewhere, a priest hums a half-remembered hymn. The city sleeps, but its heart still beats slow, measured, and quietly beautiful. Back at your quarters, you lie down with clay still under your fingernails. You close your eyes and hear it, the gentle, eternal dripping. A clock without hands, a night without alarms, and somehow the feeling that time is in good hands even if they're just yours. You wake later than usual, blinking against the light, as if you've been asleep for 1,000 years. After a night spent with water and shadows, the morning feels too fast. The world outside your window seems to move at a different pace than you. Birds flit from roof to roof, and the chatter of merchants is already rising like the steam from a clay pot. But today you're not rushing anywhere. You're joining the night watchers again, this time not alone, but as part of a System 1 made entirely of drips, stars, and sleepy men holding lamps. You return to the same courtyard just before dusk, when the air is thick with cooking smoke, and the scent of cumin and lentils. This time you're early. You sit beside the clepsydra, watching the evening light turn the water golden. Beside you are 2 other watchers, an elderly man with hands like tree roots, and a young boy who can't sit still for more than 30 seconds. You've become a team. As the sky darkens, the torches are lit, and the float is reset. The night begins again, 1 drop at a time. The elder explains the system in a voice low and gravelly, like water moving through stone. The clepsydra is divided into 12 night hours equal in count, but not in length. Summer hours are long. Winter ones are brief. The system flexes with the sky. Time bends, he says, but it still flows. Each of you takes turns at the bowl. One keeps the lamp trimmed. One marks the clay. One listens. You are the listener. You sit quietly, eyes closed, counting drops in your head. 1, 2, pause, 3. Your fingers twitch with the rhythm. It becomes a heartbeat not just of time, but of presence. You remember something the priest said your first night. Time is a thing you carry, not something you chase. You hadn't understood it then. Now it sits, heavy in your chest like a truth you've always known. The second hour passes with little notice. The boy drops his stylus once and earns a playful glare from the elder. You smile. Even this quiet ritual has its missteps. The night deepens. You take your turn at the stylus. You press the clay gently, just enough to make the mark, not enough to disturb the board. It's surprisingly hard to write with sleepy hands, but the act of marking time becomes almost sacred. You're not just noting a moment, you're confirming that it existed. A breeze sweeps in from the west, rattling the reed mats overhead. One of the torches flutters and dies. The elder lights it again with practiced ease. You all glance at the clepsydra water, still dripping, unfazed, uninterrupted. You share a small loaf of barley bread, tearing it silently between you. Time tastes like wheat and ash and a bit of salt. You chew slowly. The clepsydra doesn't. Mind dot as the fourth hour approaches. You begin to notice something unexpected. The rhythm is changing. It's not the water. It's you. You're adjusting subconsciously, syncing yourself to the drip. No longer counting the way you might count sheep or steps or coins. Now it's something deeper, a sort of internal metronome that sets the pace for your thoughts. You feel quieter, slower, more grounded. Less like a visitor, more like a part of the system. Historians still debate whether Babylonian timekeeping created a collective sense of rhythm, whether people who lived near the clepsydra started to think and act more slowly, more patiently. Some argue it was just ritual. Others say it shaped an entire cultural attitude toward the passage of life. You lean toward the second group. Fifth hour arrives, and the boy is asleep against the wall. The elder doesn't wake him. You watch as he makes the mark for him, then returns to his silent vigil. There's a gentle compassion in it. Time here is not harsh. It's forgiving, gentle. It allows for naps. As you take your next shift beside the bowl, you notice condensation on the inside of the basin. A cooler breeze must be touching the water. The drips are slightly slower now, just barely. You mark it down, not as a flaw, just as part of the night's story. That's something you're learning too. Time isn't meant to be perfect. It's not meant to be strict. It's a soft-spoken companion, a tide, not a drumbeat. The sixth hour arrives in silence. The elder stands, slowly, joints creaking like dried wood. He bows to the clepsydra, then to you. His shift is done. You and the boy, now gently snoring, are left alone with the bowl. You sit back down, feeling the weight of stillness settle around you. There's something remarkable in this ancient ritual. It asks nothing from you but your attention. It makes no demands. It simply continues, trusting you to notice. You breathe in, dot, drip, dot. You breathe out, drip, dot, time. Here is a lullaby, a soft tapping on the clay door of sleep. The next morning you don't wake so much as re-emerge. The world feels quieter after a night beside the clepsydra. Your thoughts slow, like they've adopted the tempo of dripping water. You blink against the sunlight and sit up, brushing a curl of clay dust from your tunic. The boy is gone. So is the elder, but in your mind you still hear the rhythm plip, plip, as if it's etched into your ears. Today, you're headed somewhere new. The astrologer's tower. You've seen them before, those quiet men in dark robes, eyes squinting at the sky, hands smeared with charcoal for marking tablets. But you've never followed them up the spiral stairs that snake around the outer wall of the observatory tower, each step worn smooth by centuries of sandals and stargazers. At the top, the air is clearer, cooler. You can see the Euphrates glittering in the distance, bending like a silver serpent through the city's belly. There are no bells, no trumpets, no announcements, just the sound of styluses scratching clay, and the occasional low murmur in a language that seems older than the dust. Beneath your feet, the astrologers are busy. They're not reading horoscopes. They're watching the heavens and marking the passage of time, not in hours, but in alignments, in risings. In patterns. You sit cross-legged beside one of them, a man with long hair tied in a copper clasp. He gestures to the sky with the precision of someone who can tell you what Jupiter had for breakfast. He points out Venus bright, stubborn, early in the curve of the waxing moon. He explains that timekeeping in Babylon was never purely terrestrial. It didn't stop with bowls of water or shadows on the ground. It stretched upward into the vast cosmic machinery of the night sky. Each drop, he says, is tied to a star. You blink. That seems a little poetic, but he's serious. He points to a clay tablet covered in cuneiform lines. It's a star chart, but also a timetable. It shows when specific celestial bodies rise, and how that movement corresponds to earthly events, temple rituals, market openings, royal decisions, and yes, even clepsydra adjustments. You learn that the priests would sometimes recalibrate the water clocks based on the stars. If Venus rose earlier than expected, they'd tweak the flow slightly. If the moon lingered, they might delay a ritual. The water clocks didn't just mark time, they adapted to the rhythm of the heavens. Historians still argue whether these adjustments were based on astronomy or superstition. Was it scientific observation or just the desire to keep the gods happy? Either way, the system worked. Babylon's calendar was shockingly accurate. Its predictions of lunar eclipses rivaled anything made until centuries later. And here's the truly wild part. Sometimes the water clocks themselves were used to time astronomical observations. You watch as one astrologer sets a bowl beneath a dripping vessel. When the star he's watching hits the peak of the temple roof line, he marks the bowl's level. That measurement will be compared to the previous night's and the one before that. Over time, they'll track the star's movement with a tool. As simple as dripping water. You watch this in awe. These men are timing the movement of massive celestial bodies with nothing more than patience, clay, and gravity. No gears, no metal, just the same drip you've heard all week. The astrologer hands you a small tablet, your own chart to mark. He points to a star rising just above the northern wall. That, he says, is Nisba's eye, the goddess of writing and time. You mark the position, slowly, careful not to press too hard. He nods in approval. As the morning light grows, the stars fade, one by one, like candles being snuffed out at the end of a long ceremony. The astrologers rise, stretch, and descend the tower silently. You follow, clay tablet still in hand. Back. At the temple base, a young scribe sits beside a water clock. He's counting drips and humming to himself. You watch him as he gently scratches a line into his tablet every 100 drops. It's meditative, his entire body swaying slightly. With the rhythm, you realize the connection now. From the depths of the temple to the heights of the tower, everything in Babylon flows together. Water, stars, clay, time. Each one feeds into the next, like branches of the Euphrates weaving their way toward understanding. You sit beside the scribe and start humming with him, quietly. You don't know the tune, but it doesn't matter. It's not about the melody. It's about matching the pace, feeling the drop, P-L-I-P, 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 a river, a sky full of gods, and you, a speck of dust on the edge of it all, feeling more connected than ever. The afternoon sun turns Babylon into an oven. Walls glow with heat. The clay beneath your feet feels soft and hot, and the sky stretches overhead like a faded parchment. Today your journey leads you to the heart of ceremonial time, where even the kings must wait their turn. You've been summoned not by royalty directly, of course, but by one of his timekeepers. Because even in a city that flows with patience and ritual, the king still needs to know when to speak, when to pray, when to eat, and when to look properly majestic before the gods. And that, surprisingly, requires water. You walk through palace, courtyards filled with blooming tamarisks and squawking parrots gifted by traders from the east. Soldiers stand still as statues, their bronze helmets glinting. But you're not headed toward the throne room. You're led instead to a side chamber lined with tall, narrow vessels. Dozens of them, each with a fine-spouted lip, carefully arranged. On stone pedestals, this is the royal clepsydra chamber. The air here is cooler. Stone blocks and shaded awnings protect the room from the afternoon blaze. A low fountain trickles nearby, more for ambience than function. One of the timekeepers, a man with a scroll of names tattooed around his wrist, beckons you over to an elaborate basin. It's different from the others you've seen. For one, it's adorned with gold inlays, tiny lions, and stylized suns dancing between the time marks. For another, it's not built into the floor, but raised on an intricately carved pedestal in the shape of a palm tree trunk. This, the timekeeper says, with great pride, is the king's hour bull. You take a closer look. The markings are not just lines, they're moments. Each one corresponds to a specific royal activity. There's a mark for pre-dawn anointment, one for public appearance, another for celestial consultation. Even midday nap has its own golden ring. The king's entire day, it seems, is measured by water's whims. You ask, cautiously, what happens if the bowl flows too quickly or too slowly? The timekeeper shrugs. Then the king is early or late, but he is still the king. Fair point. Still. It's your first true glimpse of how power and time dance in Babylon. The clepsydra doesn't just serve the people, it serves the palace. And while no one dares command the king, the water suggests, politely, when his moment has arrived, you're shown the process. A servant pours water from a large bronze jug into the king's hour bowl. The water flows with grace, landing precisely at the center of the vessel. A small golden float, a tiny lion's head, carved from wood, rises steadily. When it touches a certain point, a bell chimes softly, rung by a servant stationed nearby. This chime is not heard throughout the city. It's not meant for the masses. It's only for those within the palace walls. But when it sounds, people move. Drapes are drawn, attendants step forward, dancers prepare, priests ready their incense. You witness one of these transitions. The bell chimes. Immediately, a man in green linen announces, "The hour of the royal libation is upon us." A servant carries forward a polished silver goblet. The king is not visible. You're not that important, but the motion is enough to show how water controls even the highest. You glance at the float again. It drifts without rush, steady and serene. There's a sort of irony in it. The most powerful man in Babylon is, for all his robes and gods and titles, waiting for a bowl to drip. Historians still debate whether royal clepsydras were purely ceremonial or if they truly impacted state matters. Some say they were theatrical, used to give decisions a sense of divine timing. Others insist important. Proclamations were only made at certain water levels, aligning palace business with sacred flow. You think it's probably both. The timekeeper lets you handle a smaller version of the royal clepsydra, an apprentice bowl. It's light, unadorned, made for practice. He challenges you to time a 10 count using its drip. You kneel beside it and begin. Drip 1, drip 2, drip 3. You're off by 2 drips. Not bad, he says. But you'd be late, too. A coronation. You laugh, then ask the question that's been growing in your mind since you arrived. What happens when the bowl runs dry? He pauses. The king rests. The day ends. Or the gods send rain. All of them are endings. He says, it's so simply, like water running out is just expected. And maybe it is. No one tries to stop it. There's no panic, no rush to refill. When the clepsydra runs dry, the time it represented has passed and cannot be claimed again. You walk back through the palace with that thought swirling in your mind. Every powerful step taken in this place, every decree, ceremony, or celebration was tethered to a bowl of water. Time isn't forced here. It isn't barked or blared, it's a guest, a river, a suggestion. You pass the final corridor, where you glimpse a servant carefully polishing the lion float for tomorrow's drip. He cradles it like a small animal. You smile, the sun is beginning to lower, painting the walls in amber. You step back into the open, feeling the heat soften, the light stretch. And behind you, Somewhere deep in the palace, water keeps falling. Evening has cooled the city, but only slightly. Babylon sighs beneath a fading sun, its rooftops humming with quiet conversation and the occasional pluck of a stringed instrument. You're walking again, this time with a slightly heavier step and a more skeptical eye, because, as much as you've come to admire the grace and philosophy of clepsydras, today's mission is to see their failures. Yes, even the Babylonian water clocks, those elegant, sacred tricklers of time, had their off days. And today you're headed to where that becomes all too obvious. The clockwright's yard dot, it's a humble place, tucked between a weaver's stall and a narrow alley where stray cats debate territory. The clockwright himself is younger than you'd expect, thin, energetic, with permanently damp hands and a clay-stained tunic that once might have been white. He waves you over with enthusiasm and points to a cluster of clepsydras lined up like confused turtles. These are the misbehaviors, he says. Want to meet them? You kneel by the first, a squat, wide bowl with a thick spout and a faint crack along the rim. The water inside barely moves. Too cold, the clockwright explains. The air last night dropped below comfort. Clay shrinks, the spout slowed. Time got lazy. You raise an eyebrow. Lazy time? Oh yes, he says. And sometimes it gets excited, too. He gestures to another bowl. This one is deeper, slimmer, more refined. Water is gushing from the spout, not a steady drip, but a miniature waterfall. It's almost impressive. This one got sun-kissed, he says. Heat expands the clay. The hole grows. The flow speeds up. Time flies. He's not wrong. Historians have long noted how clepsydras struggled with climate. The finest calculations could be undone by a chilly breeze or an overzealous sunbeam. Some temples tried to counteract this with shaded rooms, thick stone walls, or regular recalibrations, using star positions. Others simply accepted the wobble. After all, perfection was for the gods. You move from bowl to bowl, each one a different lesson in unpredictability. One leans too far left. Another has lime deposits clogging the spout. A third was made from a bad batch of clay. It's slowly collapsing, inward like a sleepy donut dot. The clockwright laughs as he shows you a particularly dramatic failure, a bowl that looks perfect but leaks from a hidden crack on its underside. This one betrayed me during a wedding, he says. The groom made a speech meant to last 20 drops. The bowl emptied in 7. People thought he'd been cursed. You chuckle, but you also feel the weight of it. These clocks weren't just tools, they were promises. When they failed, it wasn't just time that got disrupted. It was trust. You ask how often this happens. Too often, he admits. But the city forgives. Babylon is full of second chances. You wonder aloud why they didn't just build better clocks. Use metal, seal the clay. Find some way to make the drip more dependable. He nods toward a strange object sitting alone on a stone shelf. It looks like a clepsydra, but with tiny bronze fittings along the spout. Egyptian design, he says. Imported, fancy, accurate, but soulless. You approach it. The metal gleams untouched by soot or water stains. The water falls cleanly, predictably. with no texture or sound. You don't like it? It's too neat, too silent. It doesn't breathe. You see, he says, we don't want machines. We want rhythm. That's when it hits you. Babylon's water clocks weren't about perfection. They were about partnership between humans and nature, between intention and accident. The small messines of dripping time was, in its own way, the point. You return to the misbehaving bowls and suddenly feel affection for them. The one that leans left, the one with line-scale freckles, the one that drips a little too fast when the wind changes. They're not broken. They're just honest. The clockwright lets you try shaping your own bowl. He hands you a lump of damp clay and a small wooden paddle. You slap and press, pinch and scrape, trying to recall the float you watched so closely just nights ago. Your first attempt collapses like soggy bread. You both laugh. The second one looks better, a little uneven, but promising. You'll never make two the same, he says, as he helps you smooth the spout. But that's fine. Time isn't the same every day either. You leave the yard as dusk settles fully, your half-finished bowl wrapped in cloth and slung under your arm. It's lopsided, wobbly, and yours as you walk you notice something you hadn't before. The city adjusts itself constantly. A market stall closes early because of heat. A ceremony begins late because a priest is chewing too slowly. A wedding pauses because a bowl cracked, and no one complains. They adapt. Maybe the greatest lesson of the clepsydra isn't how to measure time, but how to live with its quirks, how to forgive its wobbles, how to smile when the drip falls too soon or too late. Back in your room, you unwrap the bowl and set it by your sleeping mat. You fill it just a little enough to catch a few slow drops from a nearby jug. They fall unevenly, imperfectly, beautifully, and you sleep. You wake to the sound of gentle scraping ceramic against ceramic, like the city itself is stretching after a long sleep. Today your hands are needed, not for watching or writing or listening, but for carving, because now you're going to learn how to make time. Not metaphorically. Literally. You arrive at the workshop as the sun breaks free of the eastern wall, spilling light like honey across the dusty yard. The master potter, an older woman with arms like braided rope, waits for you beneath a frayed canopy. Her apron is stained with decades of clay, and her face is cracked with smile lines, sun lines, and a layer of dust so fine it may be permanent. She doesn't talk much, just grunts, hands you a lump of clay, and gestures to a flat stone slab that acts as your workspace. The slab is warm. The clay is cool. The balance feels right. Your first task. Shape the outer bowl. Not too wide, she says. Not too thin. If it tilts, time stumbles. You pinch and press. The clay is stubborn at first, like it knows you're new, but slowly it yields. A curve forms, then a lip. You watch the shape emerge under your fingers, like a thought being pulled from a dream. She nods. Now the inside. This is trickier. You're not just making a vessel. You're shaping the rhythm of water. The inside needs etched lines, hour marks, each spaced according to a formula that is partly math, partly intuition, and mostly magic dots. She shows you how to measure with a bent reed and a piece of twine. You watch her hands move with grace, carving marks that catch the light like whispers. Then you try. Your first line is too deep, the second too short, the third is fine. She grins. That one will make a good afternoon. You're not sure if she's joking. You don't care. You smile. You learn that these marks are more than decorations. They are memories. Some bowls carry inscriptions, short prayers, or poetic riddles. Others are personalized. One bears the name of a merchant's mother, etched softly around the rim. Another simply reads, "May this bowl forget to hurry." Historians still wonder whether the inscriptions were functional or symbolic. Some believe they were mnemonic devices for priests. Others say they were charm spells meant to stabilize the flow. You believe they were both. The potter hands you a stylus made from hardened fig wood and instructs you to carve your own inscription near the inner wall. You think for a long moment. Then, in the neatest cuneiform you can manage, you write, asterisk time is soft. Asterisk, she reads it, raises an eyebrow. Then nods. Next comes the spout. This part is deceptively important. The size, shape, and placement of the drainage hole will determine the clock's flow rate. Too small, and time clings. Too wide, and it vanishes. She hands you a sharpened reed and watches as you poke gently through the base of the bowl. Water won't flow today. The bowl still needs to dry, to be fired, to survive the test of heat and patience. But you feel the moment's weight anyway. You've given this lump of clay a future. You spend the rest of the day helping her prepare others for the kill. Dozens of bowls, each with its own quirks. Some are meant for temples, others for kitchens. A few, she tells you with a wink, are for lovers who want to time their kisses. As the sun climbs higher, the heat of the kill rises. Flames lick the insides of a large dome oven, smoke spiraling lazily toward the sky. She carefully places each bowl inside, muttering under her breath, not curses, not prayers, just names. Each clock has one, apparently. Yours, she calls it softy. Fair. While the fire does its work, she shows you her oldest piece, a clock bowl that belonged to her grandmother, or perhaps her grandmother's grandmother. It's chipped, lopsided, and beautiful. The etchings have worn down, but you can still see faint lines, like ancient smile wrinkles in ceramic. You hold it with both hands. It's surprisingly heavy. She tells you that when it finally cracked, they didn't throw it out. They buried it like a pet under a tamarisk tree somewhere near the river. That night, when the bowls are cooling and the sky is swallowing the light, she tells you the final secret. No two bowls measure time the same, she says, but they all feel the same. That's enough. You believe her. You walk home with clay under your fingernails and smoke in your hair. You don't feel tired. You feel grounded in your room. Your lopsided practice bowl still sits by your sleeping mat. You glance at it, then at the stars outside your window. Somewhere in a kill, your real clock is hardening, becoming part of Babylon's great river of time. You lie down and close your eyes. The city hums quietly around you, and even though there's no water dripping, you still hear it dot, drip, dot, drip, dot, drip, dot, the sound of tomorrow taking shape. It's early morning again, and your clay bowl is cool in your hands. Fired, finished, ready. You return to the workshop with a cautious sense of pride. The master potter takes your clepsydra from you with an unreadable expression, turning it slowly in her hands, tapping its base with one crooked finger. She squints at the spout, checks your etched inscription, "Time is soft," and finally nods. "You made a clock," she says, then adds with a half-smile, "Now don't expect it to behave." "Fair enough, Dot." She helps you fill it, carefully tipping a small jug of river water into the top, letting it flow into the empty bowl. The first drops fall fast, eager. You both crouch beside it, watching the level rise drop by drop. It's a strange feeling seeing time come to life in something you made. A bowl that wasn't just meant to hold water but moments. You leave the workshop with your clock nestled in a bundle of reeds. It's a short walk to your next destination, a meeting arranged by the clockwright. He wants you to meet some travelers. You arrive at a caravanserai near the edge of the city, where walls are lined with painted tiles, and the scent of foreign spices dances in the air. The travelers are waiting in a shaded courtyard. 2 Egyptians, a merchant from the Indus Valley, and a Nubian scholar, whose cloak is stitched with tiny shells. Each of them has brought their own timepiece. And suddenly, Babylon's clepsydra is just one rhythm in a symphony of time. The Egyptian merchant shows you a tall, narrow alabaster vessel with markings along the inside, much like your own bowl, but the design is more rigid columns of symbols instead of fluid rings. He tells you it's used mostly in temples, especially for timing prayers and offerings. His priests guard the knowledge of water flow like a secret recipe. The man from the Indus Valley displays a small stone dish with a single pinhole and a matching bowl below to catch the drops. He explains through a translator that it's used more for cooking than worship. The community time is still tied to sun position, but the water helps in matters of craft dyes, medicines, the boiling of roots. Then the Nubian scholar steps forward. His timepiece is different. A leather pouch with a reed-tipped spout and a series of etched sticks. He calls it the dripping goat bladder, and you try not to look alarmed. He laughs. It's accurate, he insists. And portable. You're impressed. While your clepsydra needs to sit still, his can be slung across a camel and still count the drops. Time that travels. Historians still debate how much these ancient cultures exchanged ideas. Did the Babylonians inspire Egypt? Or did the Niles' own time rituals seep upward, riding trade winds and gossip? Some argue the water clock evolved independently in each region. Others see fingerprints of influence everywhere. What's clear here, as you sit surrounded by water clocks shaped like bowls, goatskins, stone cups, and polished jars, is that people everywhere tried to hold time. And no one completely succeeded. The Egyptian says his clocks often suffer from algae buildup. The Indus merchant says his leaks unpredictably if the stone cracks. The Nubian scholar admits that one time a camel ate his goat bladder clock. You all laugh. The same soft, tired laugh of those who've tried to measure something unmeasurable and found it messy. Someone suggests testing them. A friendly competition. Each person fills their vessel, sets it beside the others, and you all watch Dot at first. Things look steady. But after a few minutes, discrepancies emerge. The Egyptians runs a bit fast. Yours is moderate. The Nubians is energetic. The Indus clock moves slowest of all. There's no prize, no mocking, just knowing smiles. This is timekeeping, after all. An art, not a contest. Dot as the sun reaches its peak. The group shares food dates, lentil cakes, dried mango wrapped in leaves. The talk turns to stories of when time went wrong. A wedding interrupted because the clock emptied too fast. A ritual delayed because the water froze mid-winter. A court judgment mistimed because of a clogged spout. One traveler says what you've been thinking all along. We try to shape time, but time always reshapes us. You sip cool water and look at your bowl. A little water still inside, still dripping, still counting. That night you carry your clepsydra back home as carefully as if it were alive. You set it beside your mat and watch the final drops fall. You think about how many different people have tried to hold time. How many failed? How many laughed about it anyway? You fall asleep listening to the slow, steady rhythm of your bowl. Dot, not perfect, but yours. You're up before the sun the next day, your sandals brushing the ground like feathers. Today you feel it, that subtle pull that happens near the end of a journey, a kind of soft urgency. The city is quieter at this hour, the air gentle and forgiving. You head once again toward the temple, your clepsydra wrapped carefully in its reed bundle. But this time you're not watching, or learning, or listening. You're part of the ritual. A junior priest greets you near the ziggurat's base. He gives you a half smile, the kind that says you've earned this without having to say it. He leads you through a narrow passage, into a familiar chamber, one you've been to before, lit by skylight, framed in ash-smooth stone. The temple clepsydra sits in the center, like always, but today your bowl will join it. You unwrap it with care, revealing the slightly uneven shape, the handmade ridges, your scratched inscription. Time is soft. The priest nods. Dot. He places your clepsydra beside the temple's humble, next to its large blue-glazed form, but steady. Someone brings water, and together you fill both bowls. For the next few hours, they will track time side by side. Dot. You sit quietly, cross-legged, hands on your knees, listening to both sets of drips. The temple's is slower. Yours is a touch uneven, but there's something beautiful in the way they sink and unsink, like two hearts in conversation. Dot. As the sun begins to rise through the skylight, beams of warm light fall across the bowls. The ripples shimmer. The priest begins chanting softly. Not loudly, not theatrically, just a hum, like breath turned into memory. You don't understand every word, but you feel the shape of it. A song of time, a song of change. You remember something one of the travelers said, asterisk, we try to shape time, but time reshapes us. Asterisk, and now you understand. You're not the same. Person who wandered into Babylon, clueless about bowls and drips and stars. You've sat beside clocks in silence. You've carved your own time. You've watched the stars whisper to bowls of water, and now you're offering yours back. The priest finishes his chant and gently moves your clepsydra to a raised platform by the window, where it will be left to complete its cycle in peace. It will measure the hours until dusk, he says. You nod, not speaking. There's nothing to say. You watch it for a few more minutes, just a slow drip, the quiet ripple, the light creeping across the rim. Then you rise, you walk through the temple out into the warming streets, and realize how much you now see differently. You see the shape of shadows on the walls, and imagine where the hour line would be. You hear the sound of a splash in a bucket and instinctively count the seconds between drops. You spot a boy pouring water into a cracked bowl and wonder how fast it will empty, how quickly his moment will pass. You stop by a market stall. The vendor recognizes you and grins. You look like someone who knows what time it is. You laugh, roughly. You continue walking, eventually arriving at the edge of the city, where the canals stretch wide and quiet. You sit by the bank and watch the water flow. No vessels here, no carved bowls, no marks etched by human hands. Just the river, flowing the way it always has, unbothered. Patient, you close your eyes and imagine all the clocks that have come and gone. The sacred temple clepsydras, the broken ones behind the workshops, the bowls buried beneath fig trees, the goat bladder timing pouches bouncing on camelbacks. All of them trying to do the same thing. Gently hold a moment before it slips away. Historians still debate when the clepsydra truly vanished from Babylonian life, whether it was replaced by sundials or overshadowed by mechanical inventions in faraway empires. But it doesn't really matter, because for you, the clepsydra never vanished. It's still dripping, always will be. That evening, as the last light folds itself behind the rooftops, you return to the temple. Your bowl is empty now, a faint watermark, tracing where time once sat. The priest gives you a silent nod of thanks. He doesn't offer it back, you don't expect him to, because you understand, clocks, like moments, are meant to pass on. You walk home slowly, bare feet, brushing dust. The city breathes around you, softly, rhythmically, like a lullaby made of stone and wind and footsteps. Back in your room, you lie down, arms crossed behind your head. You stare up at the ceiling and wait. And then faintly, in your memory, more than your ears, you hear it drip, 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 time, still soft. Tonight, the city is quiet in a way that only ancient places can be, thick with memory, still with heat, but resting. Babylon doesn't sleep like other cities. It settles. It exhales. It continues to flow. You're not following any priest tonight. You're not headed toward the ziggurat or a dusty workshop. You're walking the streets as yourself. No title, no task. Just a traveler who once tried to count the hours and somehow ended up inside them. You pass familiar sights that now hum, with deeper meaning. The market stalls where children once timed their games by pebble drops. The corner where the storyteller paused mid-sentence because the bowl ran dry. The courtyard where an elder marked the 4th hour with a gentle hand and a tired smile. You pause before the palace gates, remembering the lion-headed float that told the king when to drink, when to pray, when to speak. Somewhere inside that float may still rise and fall, soft as breath. Or maybe not. Maybe now the bowl is dry. Maybe the king is gone. You realize it doesn't matter. What mattered was that for a moment someone believed enough in a dripping bowl to let it govern their world. You walk further toward the garden behind the temple wall, the place where the ancient clepsydra sits beneath the fig tree, moss curling around its lip. It's still there, untouched, quiet. You kneel beside it, not to measure anything, not to track, just to be near it. You press your palm against the cool ceramic. It doesn't drip, it doesn't flow. It simply is. You remember the workshop, your potter guide, her crackling voice. Asterisk. Time isn't something we keep, it's something we join. Asterisk. You. Think about how everyone in Babylon joined it. Through bowls, through stars, through rhythm. You feel it now too. Not just hearing time, but moving with it. Like the city itself has a heartbeat, and tonight it pulses soft and slow beneath. Your fingertips. Eventually, you return to your room one final time. You place a small vessel, just a simple cup, beside your mat and fill it with water from the jug. It isn't fancy. It has no marks, no inscriptions, but you know what it is. It's yours. You lie down, listening as a single drop forms at the edge of the jug's spout. It wobbles there, fat and glistening, then falls with a gentle plink. You don't count it. You don't need to, because now, at last, you know time doesn't live in numbers. It lives in rhythm. It lives in repetition. It lives in silence between drops. And now, as your breath slows, as your eyelids grow heavy, it lives in you. So, now, just rest. Let your body settle into the softness beneath you. Let your shoulders ease down. Let your breathing lengthen. There's nothing left to track, nothing more to hold. You've walked through a city that measured time and water and patience, and now you've earned your own stillness. If you listen closely, maybe you'll still hear it, that tiny rhythm, that subtle count, that old companion of clay and gravity. Drip, 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 not as something to chase, but something to trust. Something that holds you instead of demanding anything from you. All around you, Babylon sleeps. The river glides without hurry. The stars turn overhead, slowly marking a sky-sized clock face. But here, in your own stillness, time doesn't pass. It stretches. It floats. You are part of it now. Part of a rhythm older than kings, softer than wind, truer than any ticking watch could ever be. And even when you wake, even when the day calls again and the noise returns, this rhythm will stay with you. Once you've heard the drip of a Babylonian clepsydra, truly heard it, not just in your ears, but in your chest, you'll never lose it. It will move with you, quiet, calm, like a song only you can hum. So now, close your eyes, breathe in. And drift. Drip, 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 sweet dreams